Who's yours? Okay, I will. Oh. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. It's somehow a sort of artistic distortion on the screen, but we'll try to do this anyway. And welcome to everyone online and live here in Belgrade for this panel on EUNIC and European collaboration in culture, stronger collaboration and sustainable partnerships. I am Adrien, the current president of the EUNIC cluster in Serbia here, and I'm very pleased to have distinguished, as they say, distinguished panelists, my colleagues from the EUNIC cluster that I will introduce right afterwards for the introduction now. This panel will last around 1.5 hours, and we'll go through a number of points related to fair collaboration, European cultural collaboration, and tensions in this field, and specific work of the EUNIC cluster in Serbia. Just as a general introduction, EUNIC, as you might know, is some sort of model of collaboration of European cultural institutes that is working close but not fully superposed to the European Union and to the External Action Service. There is an office in Global in Brussels, 133 clusters at the moment in more than 100 countries worldwide. So we have one cluster here in Serbia with now 18 members, where we have cultural institutes, where we have embassies, different types of members, and we'll hear about different experiences. So I will move right on to the say, introductory round of the panelists and colleagues here. We will start, maybe since we have this interesting video, we'll start right from here with Milan Lučić, Arts Manager at British Council of Serbia. So I would like to ask you just in 2 or 3 minutes to give like first impressions. What is your concept of cultural diplomacy, cultural relations at the British Council of Serbia? What do you see as, like, what are you doing? How do you do cultural diplomacy in Serbia?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult to take a specific position from the British Council of Serbia itself. I mean, there are some specificities over here because we belong to a global organization for British Council. For us, the cultural relationships are something which is a part of what we do, besides the English language, promoting the English language, and collaboration in the field of education. Actually, cultural relationships and working in arts and culture, especially, is something which is a part of what we do. And basically, those projects are there to create better understanding between the people of the United Kingdom and the nations worldwide. And therefore, we are taking different actions and projects and activities in the field of arts and culture in order to foster this collaboration, in order to create a fertile ground for close relationships between the nations. On the other hand, which is as well very specific and very important for the British Council, although the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is our the FCO is our main donor, we are an independent organization, and we create our own policies independently of what's the official policy of the UK government, though we do complement in most of the cases. So our role when it comes to cultural relations, I mean, there is, I mean, I've been just thinking, you know, in the past couple of days really about that, about the what has changed in cultural relations. I mean, first of all, we all know that there was not one concrete definition which is global, universal, and applicable all over the world. For us, cultural collaboration is something still to be, I mean, well, diplomacy, or however you may call it, it's still to be defined. We are all searching the ways to kind of establish the mutual understanding, fair mutual understanding, fair grounds. Mutuality used to be one of the very important words for us in the British Council. And therefore, I think this is our approach, I would say, globally, and we're trying to implement it here in the context of Serbia, but as well, as you said, I'm the arts manager for the Western Balkans, so we are considering this area as a cluster, and we are actually doing practically the same thing all over the place. That would be my starting point.
Thank you very much. We'll move on directly to Slavica Sandić, Communications and Public Diplomacy Officer at the Swedish Embassy in Belgrade. So essentially the same question: what are cultural relations for you in your work? How do you see this whole complex of cultural diplomacy and cultural relations?
Well, we joked a little bit about it in the beginning, and as I said, was that public diplomacy has eaten on my cultural diplomacy. Milan is working for a cultural institution, British Council, and so does also my colleague to the right. I work for an embassy, which is practically a political entity, and the embassy goes under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Therefore, we are obliged to follow the declaration of foreign policy that the Swedish government is issuing once a year, and which gives the foreign service at least very clear guidelines in terms of what areas to deal with. At the embassy, at the foreign service, we are also bound by the strategy for reform cooperation with the Western Balkans. This is not necessarily something that all Swedish embassies are dealing with throughout the world, but as the Western Balkans, we are included as a country in the Western Balkans. We are included in this strategy, Swedish strategy for development cooperation with all the countries here, including Turkey. And based on that, Serbia, actually Sweden is donating roughly 14 million euro per year to areas where that can be developed in order to meet the conditions for membership in the EU. So having said that, I have also made clear which platforms are that we're working on. The cultural policy, I would say, or cultural policy is an integral part of the Swedish foreign policy. And as such, we are working with promoting exchange between Sweden and Serbia. But we are also, if I say using, I don't think I will be much mistaken, the area of culture in order to open doors and eventually also to influence. So if we go back to the definition of what public diplomacy actually means, it means inform in order to influence. And that's maybe one of the tools of the soft power that countries such as Sweden is trying to implement. On the other hand, I see that in the recent years, there is a stronger need for pure cultural diplomacy in Sweden as well. But I think it will take maybe a year or two before that is thoroughly defined. For the time being, this is the platform that we're working on.
Thank you. Thank you, Slavica. We'll move on to
the image is there, but only on online, and we don't need it here. So that's why I turned it off.
Yes, thank you. So Sunčica, Šido, program coordinator at Goethe Institute here in Belgrade. So from your perspective of again a very specific institution, how do you see cultural diplomacy, cultural relations in your daily work in Serbia?
Yes, the Goethe Institute is the largest mediator organization involved in German foreign cultural policy. and we all work according to the basic agreement between the Federal Republic of Germany, represented by the Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs on one part, and the Goethe Institute, registered association, EUNIC, represented by its executive committee. And according to this basic agreement, we are dealing with the following tasks. And first of all is, of course, furthering the knowledge of the German language. The second is fostering international cooperation. And third, conveying the comprehensive picture of Germany by providing information on cultural, social, and political life. To perform the above-mentioned tasks, the Goethe Institute maintains cultural institutes abroad and the various exhibitions in Germany. So, since the establishment of the Goethe Institute back in 1951, which was the first institute in Germany, today there are actually 158 Goethe institutes worldwide and in 98 countries. This is something that gives you an impression of the background of it and about our structure. Caroline said last year during this Jubilee celebration of the 70 years of the Goethe Institute that its history is one of a permanent reinvention. So similarly to what previous colleagues said, we are constantly changing and finding different directions for implementing the cultural policy of
So thank you. Next colleague from the EUNIC cluster, the latest member actually of the EUNIC cluster Serbia, have joined. I'm very happy to welcome you. Adrien Abrudan from the Romanian Embassy, counselor at the Romanian Embassy. You just recently joined the cluster and have expressed a lot of activity and dynamism in the last years as a Romanian Embassy. Maybe you can tell us, because you also have Romanian institutes, maybe you can tell us a bit about the connection embassy and the institute and how you work here in Serbia and what your priorities are in cultural relations.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for giving some tips on how we should tackle this. Indeed, working in an embassy, it's challenging in tackling the cultural topic in a way. And it's not as easy as it could be for an NGO or association, so it has to follow some rules. Also, we are a neighboring country, and the biggest challenge we have in terms of following everything that is happening here is the volume, the cultural activities that are happening without our presence, or because things are natural, and the cultural lives in Serbia, the one in Romania, they are very active. The public is involved. They travel easy. We have strong cooperation in different industries. Film, mostly the most productive. We have good partnership in industry as well. In literature, we used to have in the 80s and in the 90s a strong community. Now we feel that we are not that much in contact. We work in the embassy based on the bilateral agreement, and one specific thing that describes what we do here is we don't have an institute, cultural institute here. And recently we just were now announced that we are now in direct contact with Bucharest. So we will work with the headquarters of the Romanian Cultural Institute that will help us implement some projects here. So we work with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the political line, and we follow a lot of updates on our bilateral agreements. We work with the Romanian Cultural Institute, and we try to implement with them some projects, and we aim 3 different communities. One is the Serbian public, the Romanian
cultural community from Romania coming and trying to promote the Romanian culture scene in Serbia. And the third public that we try to aim is the Romanian community in historical community in Serbia. And for each of the publics we are trying to address, we have a different approach. And for the community, it's mostly political in a way, because it is a part of the Serbian citizens and also Romanian minority, and the dialogue it's much more interesting in terms of diplomacy, and also there are some solid discussions that also are part of the political dialogue. And when we talk with the community, artistical community, then there it's only a matter of timing and finding funds. And that is not so much quick, and there you can be more creative. And for us as an embassy, we have to follow the lines and not to mix them and not to create unbalanced approach that should not be created. And being part of EUNIC, it's an opportunity, and we hope that with this new, I don't know, window of expression, way of expression here, we will also have some importance as well. Perhaps from the headquarters, that because it's not easy to be involved in that many layers and also to cover everything. So, so that is one of our priorities, to increase our colleagues that will tackle the cultural sector, because this will be my final remark. In the last years, we felt that one of the most easy and how permissive way to tackle different issues, and also the European integration discussion. And we can speak also about reconciliation with the past, or different hard topics that politically would be hard to approach. Culturally, it's easy, facilitates the dialogue much more productive. And we would like to, we already are stating this to Bucharest, that it's important and we should focus more on that, because for the region as well for Romania, the dialogue to culture is much more essential, and the European approach of the dialogue is also relevant. So I don't know if I presented everything as, but I told you everything I had in my mind.
Thank you for this overview. I think we'll come back to some of the points that will be in common for many of us later. And last but not least, I think I'm not sure if you're in the picture. You have to tell me more. Like this? Yes. Good. Katarina Vukašinović, actually vice president of the EUNIC cluster also, and coordinator for public diplomacy at the Polish embassy. Also, one of the very active members of the cluster, and always driving force in cultural relationships. So yes, the same question: how do you see the cultural relations and especially Polish-Serbian relationship in your work?
As some of the colleagues already mentioned, it's a bit different to deal with culture when you're part of the embassy, which is a political entity. And just by indicating to the colleagues who work at the embassies, it's a bit different in terms of the guidelines we receive at the beginning of, usually beginning or end of the previous year. It is very strict, and we do not have a lot of space for maneuver, let's say. Another important piece of information in case of Poland and its presence in Serbia is that there is no cultural institute at the moment, but we're looking forward to the opening of one by the end of this year, most likely. Nevertheless, this is it is quite challenging because, as many of you know, Poland is quite a close country, but in terms of cooperation, we sometimes deal with something that can be defined as the coastal town, which is it's very
distant. It's not about only the fact that it's a northern country, but sometimes it's very difficult to present values and valors of Polish culture here. And we're dealing with some unexpected experiences, I would say. I'm pretty sure that everyone here is familiar with the Feix plan. I will just tell you that sometimes we get the answers people don't know that it was Polish. We have comments like, Kundera was Polish, and then Vajda is not Polish, and so on. And not to mention that, for instance, someone mentioned literature. There is actually a fun fact, even, I don't know if everyone is familiar with that, but the Polish literature is the Nobel Prize winners. Literature, and there are 5 winners for literature of the Nobel Prize. All of those 5 have been translated into Serbian and are being translated. And we're actually having meetings with the translators who are translating Polish literature. At the moment, we have 3 of them still alive who translated Polish Nobel Prize winners. So it's not so well known. So, for instance, there was a museum of the Nobel Prize winners for women. I don't know if you remember that. 2.5 years ago, or say just before COVID, no one contacted Polish Embassy because people did not know, and Poland has 2 female Polish Nobel Prize, which is quite interesting. But going back to answering the question, as a political entity, yes, it is very strict. We actually make our own program, but we have to follow the guidelines very strictly. And EUNIC is definitely one of the platforms we're using for exchanging not only the experiences, but it's also the ideas, which is probably more valuable than the experiences themselves. So I think that's enough.
Okay, so I will try myself back in the picture. Oh, wow.
It's better online.
It's better online. Good. So I will just say a few words now as a participant about the Austrian Cultural Forum, which I'm the director of in Belgrade, and it's some sort of hybrid model between what we heard before from independent institutes and embassies. Or we pretend it's a hybrid model. I mean, in reality, it's a full part of the foreign ministry, and we are diplomats, and as such, of course, we have to follow rules from headquarters and in the end from our minister and government. But institutionally, we have first our own brand, so Austrian Cultural Forum, and second, also separate sort of budget lines, separate hierarchies for the cultural department or cultural director general in the ministry, which is quite different in culture of work from the political section. So the reality is that the Austrian Cultural Forum, which some of them have their own spaces worldwide, we have 30 Austrian Cultural Forum worldwide. We don't have our own space. We're just located in the embassy. So administratively, it's a full part of the embassy, but in terms of real life practice, we have quite a lot of freedom to work away, take some distance from the day-to-day, say, political business. In a sense, we see this, or it was done like this to get the best of both worlds. And also, for practical reasons, as a small country, you cannot build up these large structures and still be efficient abroad as larger countries can do. So that's the structure in a nutshell. And when it comes to our content and the way we see cultural relations abroad, we try to focus, as Katarina mentioned, there are always perceptions of the country, and we have to take into account. The perception of Austria is a very traditional one, very much past-oriented in many ways. So big names, composers, writers, and so on, but mostly dead, unfortunately. So we try to change this a little bit and focus on contemporary artists and creative people, innovative people, scientists, and also new topics increasingly, digital humanism, environment, and so on and so forth. Things that people don't associate necessarily with Austria, but where Austria has something to tell and has something to learn also, and that's what we try to work on. And also, you mentioned neutrality before, as a key word. It's not the word we use, but we use dialogue as a key concept, and this is something that that drives us. Also, in many cases, dialogue, not just with Austria, but dialogue, regional dialogue, dialogue of religions, dialogue of ethnic groups, depending on the context, something that we support in our cultural foreign policy. So the Austrian Foreign Ministry is a member of EUNIC at the capital level, and EUNIC is one of our priorities also abroad. So we're supposed to actively engage in EUNIC and to try to make it work and take the presidency and make sure that the collaboration works in all contexts, and it's always different depending on where you are, but usually the Austrian cultural fora are very active. So that's just a presentation as a participant of the panel, but now I'm going back to the moderating role. And I wanted to reflect on a few things that already came up that I would like to call tensions between these two main poles, areas. One of them being, let's say, dialogue, being cooperation. We heard being exchange, all these things of let's say mutual understanding, stepping back from your own point of view to understand the other, getting rid of your prejudices, getting rid of your, let's say, sometimes narrow national picture, and so on and so forth. That is one part, and let's say the other side that we heard. Of course, it's more prevalent in embassy work, where we have also the concept of cultural diplomacy as a tool, and then seen as a part of public diplomacy as a subset, let's say, to reach certain goals. Adrien mentioned the possibility to tackle certain issues with fewer problems than if you go about it directly through the political channels. But of course, this is an attention, because in a sense it's only possible to use culture as a tool to achieve certain things that you can't do in another way, because the perception of cultural policy is that it is in some way disinterested. And of course, it will only be perceived that way if you keep some sort of this sort of dialogue and step back from your interest. So to use cultural policy in your interest, you have to be careful not to push your interest too much. Right? This is one tension I see, or to not be perceived as pushing your interest too much, being some sort of independent project. And yeah, and then of course we are here in a very specific context of Serbia as a candidate country to the EU, and a country that has this sort of very specific relationship to, let's say, the European Union, but also to other major players, both in terms of politics, in terms of energy in this case now, but also cultural. So in terms of identity, in terms of heritage, in terms of religious identity, and things like that. So maybe to put it bluntly, you know, and just as a starting point for discussion now, quite open, are you confronted with this perception of being a foreign actor that wants to push certain topics on Serbia, you know, from outside, with some sort of agenda, or or not really, or do you see that this perception is one in Serbia in your work of, let's say, equal footing and of open dialogue? How do you see the perception from the Serbian side in your work? And so please feel free to, whoever is interested in picking up.
It is a very difficult question. Of course, I mean, that's something that we are. You should start. Sorry.
Yes. Refocus Austria. Yeah. Okay.
That's right.
It is a tough question. Like, how do you reach, as we say, spirituality? And of course, I mean, the British Council has a very long history. We're over 8 years here in Serbia, concretely. And I always remember when I was young, just a couple of years ago, that everybody went to Knez Mihajlo, to our library, where people gathered and they were exposed to British culture. And that was enough. There was no pressure to do something which will kind of bring this relationship to a very tiny line. Of course, the Britain is perceived in different ways, especially in Serbia, and we are facing that on daily level. It's not a secret, but as well we are very open, and we try to explain our approach to our programs. Perhaps, I mean, I did a slightly general introduction to what we do globally, but here in Serbia there are 3 areas that we are still focused on. Later on I will tell about the transformation of the British Council in the coming years, strategy 2035 and other things. But until now we were looking just at 3. I mean, what can a cultural organization of the British Council as well offer today? British organizations, museums, theaters, they're very artists, they're very well known, and there is really not really many things that we can do that the internet cannot provide to festivals like Fest or BITEF or name it, like so, and as well our cultural institutions are acting quite let's say commercially, or they're entrepreneurs in the field. Today, if you have enough money for theater, for national gallery, it all depends on the finances. I'm speaking on global terms. So what can an organization as British Council do in Serbia, and how do we secure this mutuality or dialogue or equality in approaching the programs we're doing? We did it till now. We'll see what next steps will do, but I think it's even going to be better, because we said, we heard from our partners. It's not even, it was not purely our decision. We try to keep close communication with the ministries, with the cultural institutions, with the independent field, and trying to translate those needs into what we do. So for us, our programs were based on 3 pillars. One was individual skills. So we wanted to bring the exchange between individuals within the region and the UK in different fields. I can give a concrete examples. The second one was capacity for building for institutions through exchange programs, and I will demonstrate how we did that. And the third layer, which is kind of more vertical, which is of course the regional collaboration in the Western Balkans. Obtaining mutuality for us is not very easy. I mean, as well, it's a lot of work, and you need to translate the needs of what is needed here in Serbia to what's going on in the UK. But we are not trying to impose, okay, these are the experts in this field, they're going to teach you how to, through our programs, we're really making it equal. So one of those programs are perceptions, for instance, where actually we did not, normally in the past, British Council used to curate an exhibition from our 9,000 pieces collection, and it will tour, it was the collection, the most traveled collection in the world. For 8 years, this collection has been traveling around. For the first time, from the Western Balkans, we invited the curators from here and their institutions to take part in the program. They came in our collection, and we just said, let's choose a common topic. And we all agreed that it was about the gender balance in the collections within the Western Balkans, and the result was enormous. But we are trying to secure that those programs are not like paternal, they don't have this paternal relationship to partners or preaching what they want to do, because we are actually, through our programs, we are sharing our values, which are less, I would say, from my perspective, less based on this national identity thing, more to contemporary, diverse Britain and all these differences it is today.
Anyone wants to?
Yeah, well, I can
Rebound.
just provoke by so I don't know if you've heard, I just recently the expression that what sun is for Spain, the languages for the British languages for England, and we just or Great Britain, and we are speaking English now. So instead, it's you have 50% of the goals already set, so to say. But so if we compare what you have just said with a country like Sweden, from a Serbian perspective, also Germany, you were very sizable countries. In Romania is not that small either. So when we speak about sizes, Sweden is a very small country, and just recently they reached the threshold of 10 million inhabitants. And so I go back a little bit now. So what does Sweden have to compete with on the international market, if I can say so? How can Sweden become attractive for anybody out there, outside? And it has taken a long way for Sweden to establish, okay, what is it that we want to sell, more or less, but not sell in money, but just make our Sweden more attractive. So we have stepped away from the traditional values such as the Vikings, Abba, red houses with white corners, dollar horses, everything that is very, very traditional. And we are trying to reach an image now that really reflects what Sweden is today. And I would say that cultural expression is also a reflection of how the society looks like. The Swedish society today has icons that are internationally known, but that do not have a Swedish origin. For instance, Vukašinović is yes, himself is very. He doesn't see himself like the purest Swedish icon that he is. We have in music, etc. We have DJs that only a certain target group knows of, but not the older target group. So things are really, really changing very much. And that's why, just going back to the basic of what Sweden is today and how you want, to whom you want to present it, and what do you want to achieve from it. So that's where we have, you mentioned the interests. Sweden is in the top of many indexes, such as human rights, gender equality, democracy. And when we do Sweden promotion, during a couple of years, when we followed the rules of working with Sweden promotion, it was a one-way communication. And often it was perceived as bragging from the other side, because everything was so top-notch and everything so perfect that we were speaking of. So it was difficult for other countries to relate to what Sweden had to offer. That can be understandable. Therefore, a Sweden promotion is such that I think that we all need to do, Germany and German society, Britain, etc. So we do with Sweden, but it really needs to be mixed up with cultural diplomacy, because that cultural diplomacy provides a two-way street. And that's within the cultural diplomacy you can obtain, as you said in the beginning, you can overstep the barriers and actually get to the people and create the understanding and friendship. So that's how I said. So it's when you go after promoting the interests of a country, and usually only have that in focus, it is not well received. It will be received only if you open the doors for advice, for a communication in the opposite direction. That is what we are working with. I just wanted in the beginning, I didn't mention that as the Swedish Embassy, we are not working alone in culture field or public diplomacy. We do not have a cultural institute. There are only 3 Swedish cultural institutes in the world. One is New York, Paris, and the third one is the library in Alexandria, Egypt. Sweden has 7 or 8 cultural attaches throughout the world. It's also very on scale and a small scale activity, and therefore the foreign missions are the holders of the cultural diplomacy of Sweden. So Swedish Institute is the institution that helps us with that. Swedish Institute is a governmental agency that is totally autonomous from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And it's actually, if the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the government stands as a father, then the Swedish Institute in this marriage, and helps us find the right ways to reach out to our project.
Yes, maybe something to add, or I mean, you have
Yes,
specific situations.
we similarly as Milan, I also as a child visited Goethe Institute studying while I was learning German at the primary school, and back then it was really an institution for first of all representing German arts and culture. It was of course good enough for me with friends and see a movie from Germany, so on. In long-term period, we are also with each of our institutions trying to refocus somehow this from this primary, which remains, of course, our primary task to represent arts and culture, but also to involve in this dialogue with us all kinds of different institutions, governmental and non-governmental, and individual artists and activists in different fields. And even if you do that, even if you're really focused on certain communities and matters, for example, we did this project Urban Incubator in some, I remember it was like 10 years ago at the Salamala water, and we were strongly interested in this participation of the local community on this issue, what is going on in Salamala, what are investments doing, and how is it all conducted there. So for us, we were trying back then to involve as much as possible German experts and German individuals working on this issue, and we raised this famous question to whom the city belongs. We were also very active in different organizing of different panels of different work programs, and at some point we even got to this discussion or dialogue with the representatives of Serbian institutions. So this was a huge step for the Institute. When we speak about these progresses in the dialogues, we are all, of course, very into this dialogue. But as Milan was wondering, how to actually really understand the needs, and how to translate the needs concrete actions that you can show. So yes, we are now doing a lot of programs in this dialogue process with different activists and artists. And we're especially active in these mentoring programs for emerging or young professionals. We find it really important way of establishing this sort of say long-lasting dialogues that will continue even after the project and so on. So this is the reason why we, for example, 2016 established this project for started as a program of excellency at the Goethe Institute, and this was back then, and is still a new, innovative, inclusive educational program dedicated to young Southeast European film directors that actually get knowledge how to develop their projects, in the sense how can they make their first long feature film. And today this project is actually a really funded project. We got this support this year, and we are continuing to do this. But we also had to find this exit strategy for being this project of excellency and being supported from our central office in regional office in Athens. And it is always a question how you continue with such successful projects. First things first, it's really a successful project. For example, till today, 40 film directors from the region of Southeast Europe developed their film projects for this program. The program is done under the auspice of 4 European film festivals in the region. It is first of all the International Film Festival in Lučić, then it's also the Cinematographers Film Festival, Brothers in Macedonia, Authors Film Festival in Belgrade, and the Sofia International Festival. So these partners, because during this period of time, these festivals also were associated partners of the project, and also participants get this opportunity to connect with the wider audiovisual community on spot at these festivals. They get the chance to pitch their own films. So today, 13 of the projects were established as European co-productions. 5 films, and we have to bear in mind also that this low or pure or budgetary situation and possibility this film production is not easy in this region, and also this pandemic crisis that postponed many of the premieres or films also to be shot. Influenced this situation, but today we have 5 feature films that won many prizes. We have this Marina project from Antonella Lučić, who last year won the enormously prestigious award at the Cannes Festival for the best debut film. It's Camera Door at the Cannes Festival, and also, for example, Inventory by Vukašinović, Slovenian director, was presented at the prestigious San Sebastian Film Festival and won 5 national awards, and among other also for the best film. So also previously developed film, for example, the job by Vukašinović, also got 10 awards in different festivals, was nominated for the Wax Prize, for example, or the film from Florence Papa, Romanian participant of this project, was the candidate for the 93rd Oscars. So this is an enormous success of the project, and 5 films are already done, and also 7 are currently in the post-production phase. So I think also that this kind of projects help this dialogue process and help also better understanding the needs of users or of our program, not to stay in this position of a user, but also to get involved in the process.
Thank you. Sunčica, I would, I mean, if I was provocative, you could of course always ask, why does Germany, fund the films here? Is there some sort of, do you want to get all the good people to go away country, there's this question of migration that is a huge topic here. Germany and Austria in this case are not exactly the same boat, but in a similar situation of having very large diaspora from the region and of attracting people still, which is of course positive for our societies, but can be detrimental for Serbian or say Balkan societies. So maybe we can come back to this later, but this is somehow also this sort of tension, you know, attracting people, exchanging people. Are we somehow unduly benefiting from the brightest and most active people or not? But maybe as a neighboring country and and the country with a minority, maybe you can Adrian, tell us something also about this sort of perception of your work here, and also these tensions that are probably a bit or these different parts of interests in your work that are probably different for Romania.
So yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, it's helping me a lot doing somehow the public diplomacy and cultural diplomacy now. Have some cultural diplomacy line because this is reality as well. We are having a neighboring cultural cooperation in the proper terms. So we experienced with the culture with the Serbian people mostly the same. We had the same experience. So here the only barrier is the language, because we share the same background, we share the same experiences, and up to a point we were looking at Belgrade as a international scene when we are not, and now we are just experiencing we are exchanging our experience. So our cooperation is strictly based on what we can offer one another. So we cannot claim that we can export anything cultural that already in Serbia doesn't exist, or Serbia cannot export something that already in Romania doesn't exist. The only difference, and this is what we encourage, we cannot influence because Romania is not that so resourceful in funding cultural projects. We can only encourage we give advices to develop the independent art scene. Because in Romania, the pressure on the state and on us, the embassies, maybe comes from the independent artistic scene in Romania. And that's the beauty of part of our activity, because you are not going to our colleagues from the Ministry of Culture. We are not going for inspiration. Basically, we have to have enough time to manage the resource of the independent community in our country. And here as well, we see a growing tendency, and we are very happy to see even much more successful stories than we had at home, and we try to put them in contact. You mentioned that having a minority. Well, that's true. It's a different approach. Our minority here still it's a historical community. So it belonged all the time to Serbia, and it's integrated, and they don't have any other cultural problem with the belonging state. For us, the challenge talking with the community is to, from time to time, I had these stories with my challenges when I go in, I'm tackling the community culturally, and our challenges is to really understand that this is their heritage, and not to influence their heritage, because what makes them so special is the fact that they are preserving cultural background that you cannot find in Romania that much. So it's very rare in Romania, and it's very, very much here. And we had a meeting previously with some community organization, cultural community. They convinced me, and I needed this in order to be convinced that look, what's happening in Romania, it's interesting for us, but we have our heritage, and we want you to support us preserving that, not in order to update it. And note taken, and I understood that, and it's very hard for a diplomat to say, okay, then I have to take this and export it in Romania, because otherwise that's the beauty part of it. So what we are doing now is a reverse flow. We are not bringing culture from Romania to the community here. We are taking culture from the community and sending it to Romania and making more aware that that we have this treasure here. And the way people speak and the slang, I don't know how to say it in English, because it's not the literal Romania, it's different. That's also something that we should observe in the specificity of the community. So we are a happy case. I don't know if it's comparable with other minorities, but our culture of the dialogues are strictly based on resources. We need more, and we will benefit if we have more. Otherwise, and one remark to your question, when you said that the culture is also European dimension in Europe section, I agree with what you said, but also I have to say that the cultural market and the culture scene in Serbia is already in European in terms of expression, accessing ideas. I never felt that they need the European approach. I felt only that they need the European support, in a way, as a mechanism and instruments of financing and more room on the stage. And that's our duty. And I don't know if we have to influence that, we have to just support it. And I'm speaking from a country that has to do more with their culture, and I hope that someday we will be able to support more. But I know that Sweden is doing a lot, and also Swedish German colleagues that they are supporting, and in a way we stand alongside our colleagues, the Austrian colleagues that are doing a lot. So somehow that's the best part of being in the group, that the work of your colleagues somehow represents your work. So when I'm referring to your support given to the Serbian cultural artists, I'm referring to the European in a way, and I'm taking that credit a little bit, but because I'm part of the community. So, but it's one of the advantages in being part of the same boat. And sorry for my long question, but I think if needed, I can.
Thank you. Thank you. I know it's. We'll move on to let's say the unique dimension next, and these specificities. But I wanted to ask you first, also about maybe a few points were raised on sustainability, and in the end, how do you actually do something sustainable and something that is not that has added value, that does not say contradict or just is not just in parallel to what other actors are doing. Since you're building up this Polish Institute, maybe you can or something else, but you can share some thoughts about how do you go about it with the Polish Institute here in terms of building some sort of sustainable connection in your specific context that you mentioned before, because that's very interesting for all of us.
I would say that I actually have to go back to what Feix said. It's very important to understand how important the branding of the country. So it's not enough to say, "Oh, I come from this EU country, which is big." You really have to sell it. Exactly the word that the EUNIC say. And I can tell you that, for example, in case of Poland, we are dealing with the heavy cross of history. So when you're presenting something from Poland as contemporary, it is not perceived as maybe advanced as it is from Sweden or Germany. It's one step backwards. Like, oh well, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, before, and it's not like we want to be like that. It's very difficult, and that's why it's important to brand the country in the right way, to see what the strengths are and what the potential weaknesses are, and what is interesting in a country and what is not interesting. So in Serbia, it's very difficult to talk about history, because people in Serbia are aware of what difficult history is, and they know what war is. Some of the things that we discussed actually at the meeting, one of the things that I raised. It's difficult to impress people with historical events. on the other hand, there are countries in which history is a big part of the national identity. There is part of the historical heritage that is being pointed out and cherished and just talked about in a way that in Serbia it is not. So how do you represent and present history of another country in a country that is like, this does not impress me. Okay, we've been there, we've done that. So I think it's very, it's a sensitive topic, and I think it needs to be very well thought, the approach, especially in this area. But going back to your question, I think when it comes to the exact example of Poland, we're very lucky to have practically all the doors open here, and it's we have what the other colleagues don't have. Oh, the Slavic nation, and oh, we're the Slavs. So it's more about gathering on the similarities. It's not that people are pointing out all the differences. I think it's still very easy to cooperate. And when it comes to institutions, not to mention only the university of ours because we're here, but we've had excellent cooperation, and it's not just about the institutional level, but also on the very personal level, I would say. So I think we don't have any kind of issues with the authorities and
You. So now I would like to move on to EUNIC. What is EUNIC actually? What do we do? And apart from the actual things that we do here and what we brand as EUNIC and all these questions and issues of visibility and so on that do plague us in our day-to-day work, maybe think about the fundamentals and let's say the strategic outlook of EUNIC and of it's a European, not just EU, but European cooperation in foreign cultural policy. And EUNIC has established itself recently as a driving force in pushing the boundaries in a certain sense of cultural relations, going beyond cultural diplomacy. EUNIC Global has developed a lot of activities, a lot of new calls with it's a European Spaces of Cultures as one big new approach to cultural relations abroad, with the Fair Collaboration Toolkit as a way of rethinking cultural collaboration. And this is also something that is a topic of this conference. So I wanted to talk about this. Just as a very brief introduction personally. Again, here I see, let's say, a big issue and tension between this sort of universalization of European values that we heard also from some of you, human rights and working with the civil society and supporting activists and so on. These are all aspects that are somehow related to let's say universal values and European values / universal values. That's the question a little bit. What does it mean? And on the other side, and this is what EUNIC drives a lot with this fair collaboration, is this bottom-up approach. So that we really have to, or EUNIC pushes us in these calls with this toolkit to reverse the process of developing projects, of working with people on the ground, of developing joint projects within EUNIC, to put the local needs first, but really first in the sense that we don't come with our preconception, with our list of priorities from whoever, our ministry or our headquarters, and so on, but we really listen to what's going on here and take this seriously. And of course, Serbia is a European country, there's no question about that, so we have very close and there is not a big gap to begin with, but of course there are a lot of countries where the very question of what is democracy or what are human rights are quite differently perceived from Europe. So there it's an added challenge if you want to do fair cultural collaboration in China, for example, or what does it mean, or what is fair, where the actors you talk to, and so on and so forth. Here, the problem is not probably as acute, but still you have it in the sense that how can you, in the end, how can you do fair cultural collaboration here? Do you already have a bias in choosing your partners? The usual suspects that we all work with instead of institutions, or do you have a bias in choosing institutions such as University of Arts or other faculties or the Ministry of Culture? What actually is fair? So maybe that's the question. What is, and that's a big question for me. What
you mean?
I don't know. That's the question I want to ask, because this is in the end the big question. I think it's viewed by EUNIC Global and by many people as revising the colonial or post-colonial approach to cultural diplomacy, where Western-driven set of values and culture that is exported, and nothing comes back in a sense, or what comes back was the thing that was influenced before. So it's a revision of this. It's some sort of post-colonial approach, which is certainly good. But then the question is, how do you actually do it, and how do you materialize it and concretize it? So that's maybe the question for you. What do you think can be fair cultural collaboration in your work here in Serbia? Please.
One, I don't know. One good experience we have, we are having all the time. It's better to involve also the official representative when you are doing the project. Not because it's fair, it's because sometimes you just perhaps you are subjective in approaching something that you think it's suitable for giving the right call. So I think when it comes from an embassy and you would like to fairly present some cultural aspects that both of the countries would benefit from, a dialogue, not only being part of the organization, but a dialogue with an institution, for us all that had a good outcome. So we wanted to present an exhibition on, or now we are working on an exhibition with the EUNIC, and we talked with somebody from the Ministry of Culture, and we asked where or with whom we should cooperate in Serbia to have this outcome, what we are planning, and we got some really good advices, and they were really good. When it comes with the independent artists, as some people that we are working with, we ask them if they need this event to be supported also by the local authorities, and then we are fair with them. You need local authorities to be part of it, or you just prefer to keep it in an independent approach. Sometimes it's not, we don't want it because they want to keep it independent without any polemics. And then we don't go and we reserve only to invite somebody from the local authorities to be part of the event as a guest. So I think that is depends on how do we want to address the product, the cultural product that we are trying to promote. So, and with whom do we work? And for an embassy, the biggest impact you have on a bilateral relation is to have partner with somebody official. And we also, again, that it's something that we recommend, again, is that you have the chance in a bilateral dialogue, in mutual cooperation, to show a good practice model, if you want. In order, you can also present how things are going in your ministry, in your embassy, what's your touch, and then through this dialogue, you perhaps can give a potential update or upgrade to your partner. So I think the state is, it's fair for them, also for us, to be more involved, because you have the chance to really show by practice what's your alternative to green culture? And I don't know, even from the bad experiences, one way, as I will describe fair.
Any other takes on fairness?
I think it's a very broad topic, but from our experiences, I would say that imposing a cultural value is wrong in terms of the reception you get. So I think even when you go back to the pandemic and everything that happened in the past 2 years, we all felt, and it was very, very interesting that 2 years ago everyone thought once it's over, everyone would go back to cultural content in general, and people were thirsty of the bands and so on. Whereas, again, our experiences are very limited because we're a small embassy, we have a very limited budget, but it's not like that at all. And it feels like there needs to be some kind of adjustment of the content that not only now you need to take care of whether it's imposing a value or not, you also need to focus on whether it's interesting or not. It's very obvious that some changes have happened, and it's like a worldwide adjustment in culture that will happen at one point.
I still don't know if I've understood the question, or the definition of fairness and of cultural cooperation. I think it's more of for me, I see it as a challenge to develop the cooperation models with the local organizations, whether they be state-driven or belong to civil society. Up to now, we have, as EUNIC, EUNIC itself, EUNIC Serbia has undergone an identification or identity process. So when speaking of colonial approach, I remember when Sweden entered EUNIC Serbia in 2009, we were not very welcomed by the big ones. So there is this within European Union. There are of course also various approaches to European collaboration, but it has developed very much. For the time being, I think EUNIC Serbia is working very much, and I think that we are always looking for ways to reach out to the local community, whether it be state or civil society. And the EUNIC Global is trying to do its best to support us with some incentives and guidelines, etc. However, I think that the fairness could be achieved if we maybe start the other way around. I see the representatives of huge institutions, cultural institutions, the Serbian cultural life here, and it would be very interesting to see. Up to now, there has been collaboration on a bilateral level, but if we open the floor for discussions from, for instance, the National Library of Polaris, or we have two EUNIC, to see where we can find routes, it would be also easier for us as countries within EUNIC to meet the interest, not needs, but interest, more interest. What you would be interested in obtaining from us as EUNIC. The fairness of the answer of what you're looking for actually is, I think we should broaden our scope of local partners and also introduce ways of inviting or finding collaboration with a circle that is not EU substance.
Just add to it, I think collaboration is the most difficult thing. There is no formula. And we all of us in this roundtable, we are involved in a very difficult job, which is actually can somehow do something magic and then actually make matter how you want to make an equal collaboration with the two organizations, two artists, it's always a personal contact. We can kind of initiate it with different activities. We can really invest a lot of energy. I mean, I was listening to my colleagues, like, I would like to see all the Romanians film 20 times at Polish theater, and it's, for me, it's probably the most exciting thing happening in arts in Europe, you know. Like, but what can you do from their position? How to pull that out and how to make somebody, because as well on the other side, our partners, both individuals and organizations, are oppressed by their own situation, finances, resources, everything else, and it's very, very difficult for us. The British Council tried to, I mean, as well, I apologize if I sound like I'm speaking from a too luxurious position. I don't think it's that good. I mean, it's similar difficulties on the other side as the Polish Institute, for instance. My point is that actually we have changed a lot of strategies of it, in that field, because that is important for us. I mean, our field of where we can intervene, we are not, like, if you go backwards for 10 years, none of the festivals have been supported by the British Council. None of the artists who came here, which is a normal thing, which is happening. We tried once with a famous film festival weekends in Domomladine. We understood how, you know, like, so we are trying really on different way to kind of create a sparkle and identify who are the people who want to collaborate with each other on a fair ground. There'll always be criticism, of course, and you could never, you know, like you saying, for me, for instance, first, probably the most I've been the director for a very short period of time of the Serbian Film Center. This is one of the most exciting projects because I know how it is difficult for a young movie maker, for a director to make his first movie. What do you have to do? Who do you have to play with? And as a foreign cultural center, you give him a chance. I doubt that anybody thought he would be exported to Germany to create movies at all. I'm pretty much sure. So we all try strategies. It depends. You know, we are trying on one hand, we try to build very long-term relationships with museums, with emerging curators. You know, but there is not a one single formula. The only thing that you can really make yourself open and make sure that you respect and get out of the partner, because as well, how many times we did not actually understand what our partners want because they were not able to formulate and put it in the words that we can translate to somebody else. Let's be fair to the end of the story. So I think it's a process, and there is no secret formula that we can add, you know, 3 + 2, and then there you go. This is the collaboration. I think it's a lot of work for us, and I think it's especially this time the space is really narrow at that point.
It's a good question.
Because of course, not the idea to make a project towards Soviet
I was being a devil's advocate.
We understood very well.
Yeah, but it happens.
And none of the directors their country, they all say for us it's really important because of the Southeast European decades-long hostility and tensions and so on, to somehow connect these people, and not only them among themselves, and not only them with and now I would say human experts and all of a sudden accused for the strong approach, but they're also mentors from all the participating countries involved in the whole process, and also at all these film festivals where they meet, they can, of course, share and offer the stories connected to the Southeast European region that are maybe not stories that are known by the film professionals and by the audiences. So they get this chance to interact with really much larger audiovisual community than they would ever have the chance to. So this was our main purpose, actually, that we somehow reveal all these different languages, approaches to as a visual style approaches, all these really different issues that they want to deal with in their movies. So I'm sitting, for example, in this pre-selection jury for Serbia and for Montenegro. It was really interesting this year to read what issues are they interested in both, I would say, our country. And then you have this one jury where we read this pre-selected project. You wouldn't believe how similar all of these topics of the suggested movies are. You never you would never imagine actually how are they thinking about the past of their countries, which is very often the topic of the film project, for example. They are not at all into this modern and this today's issues. Many of them are really in the history of their own countries. So this was also important for us to understand better and to see how young people are actually under this burden of the history and the tensions of this region. So we really think that this exchange within the group and also with professionals and with audiences, and these professionals and audiences, this is national and then regional and then European and then international level. So this really provides this presentation of the topics that are actually the main topics for the young creatives in respective countries.
Very briefly, Adrian.
I would like to add something, just a remark that I think it's useful, and also for EUNIC, being the latest member of the class, I have somehow too much in it, perhaps. But anyways, it's a good thing. I congratulate myself. One thing that we should also share, I agree with my colleagues that there has been difference. But one thing that we all, as cultural managers in different situations, political or being part of an institute, we share is the same struggle. When we work in a cultural activity or a project, most of us in a different situation, we have the same struggles, like audience, where do you do the project, where do you get the money from. So, but this is the common language. Whenever you speak with your partner, coming from an NGO or from a state or international organization, the struggles are the same. So if you start from that, then nobody would be patronizing. Nobody, because from that point of view, everybody has the same perspective. Because also one example that I somehow like to give, perhaps you will find it also interesting. It's if we share the same experience. For example, my early ages in the 80s, I was raised in the communist country, and I was speaking with a colleague from Germany, and we spoke about the double. I don't know if you know when you had a phone in your house, you had a double. You had another neighbor connected with the same line. And if you just say this joke or you tell this story, the same struggle you had when you were small, that you are picking up the phone and you could listen to the conversation of your neighbor. And she was very angry. Adrian, please close that phone. I will tell this to your father. And then you have to call it. This creates, that sympathy, that possibility to feel that your colleague is somehow from the same ground, planet. We are on the same planet. And I think that should connect us more. The struggles, the double, if you have it, but then that's something that we used to have. Fortunately or unfortunately, it was your neighbor. Mine was a good neighbor. She worked in the Pepsi factory. She brought me Pepsi when I was small. So thank you. But I think that's the remark I wanted to add. So let's talk also about the struggles. And sorry for the commercial. Thank you.
So the joint story and the struggles, I think it's a good outlook for this sort of approach to fairness. Maybe just now to wrap it up, an outlook
to the future as outlook to Europe. Maybe you can tell us 1 minute or something like this. What do you think is the most interesting thing that you haven't been doing until now in your cultural institutes or in your embassies, but that you really want to do in the future in Serbia, or the most interesting area thematically, the most interesting partners that you're looking forward to work with, the exciting fields appearing in Serbia, something that gives us a perspective for the future in your work. If, of course, as much as you can share it. I mean, I'm not asking for any trade secrets, but just to share the energy. Also, the looking at the future and the struggle is real and so on. But there are also other things that are coming up and are exciting and you're looking forward to do in the future. So maybe something that you haven't been doing, but that you're really looking forward to doing in the future in your work. But very briefly, because we have around 10 minutes on this.
I would say that
Yes.
as an employee, not only as the representative of the institution, I would personally like to connect computer game industry in Poland. I think that would be great because many people don't know that you don't do that, right? Yeah, because many people don't know that, for instance, we have this popular in Serbia and there's cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is actually called video game. It's fun.
Oh, we have experience around the table.
I will give you all my files. I just stopped doing it. So.
Yeah, so we have personal and professional.
Absolutely
we will provide you with everything.
Total intelligence, everything,
So that's what EUNIC is for.
That's EUNIC.
Yeah. Any other future plans, ideas, fields that you're looking forward to cover?
Yes, it's interesting that it's also like when you were asking the question, I was like, what is there that we didn't do? And then it's really hard for me to think of it because, for example, gaming, this project that we developed last year. Yes, but we already
No doubt.
you already did it. No, we did it last year, and we will continue to do it. Also, we're doing it this year. And we plan to develop this even further. We are doing this collaborative project with the colleagues from the in Serbia and also the Serbian Games Association. And last year we get this really wonderful output where almost half of the participants of 30-something young people ended up with assemblies in Serbian gaming companies. So this is really an output that we could dream of. And if I would define something for the future, what would I like to do? It's hard to say something that we didn't, but it's maybe something that we will provide to these emerging professionals, maybe some more concrete possibilities for their careers, and not only for their careers as experts in the fields they are active in, but also as decision makers for the fields that they are active in, because I think this is something that isn't always.
I would go for the very apparent. We have done so much of the networking, the discussion, the panels, the awareness raising, and so many things. What I like is the pure cultural diplomacy concept. It's really, sometimes I think that we need to go back to some basics. And that is something that we, in my 33 years of employment and working in this field, the cultural diplomacy has been colored with so many other needs, and just go back to to pure culture exchange. and collaboration.
I agree with what you said, and yeah, I feel that we should go back to the roots. And also we should somehow, I think that something that I would like to do is to speak about universal culture a little bit, that somehow influenced something in Romania and also in Serbia, and that would be useful for us to have a, I don't know, a not nationalistic approach culture. Because there are some points in our cultural history that were not made in our countries, and we should be more aware about. And speaking about that colonialistic approach, sometimes it's vice versa. And perhaps in these days, it's not quite the suitable project, because most of the part of the literature comes. But I think we should speak about universal and in culture. And we should bring more from South America, we should bring more from Asia and from other spaces, the discussion, because that will be not patronizing, just will be a point of admitting that culture is universal and we can express it. So one of the ambitions, perhaps not in this mandate, but I will definitely like to do that. So it's a bucket list if you
Yeah, I'm going to say just one.
Yeah, I was this lady with the male voice, I believe.
I'm going to, this is my private own view on things, but I think it will kind of end up in what's the corporate response to it. I don't know if it's the right one. But in fact, I'm totally persuaded that the cultural institutions and formats, platforms, festivals, whatever, are quite endangered at the moment, globally, not here in Serbia. I think that, arts can stand anything except to be ignored. And arts is started to be ignored or considered to be just an industry, so that if you go to Paris, you're just consuming the arts. And I think that the creative sector, by being called creative, is already in quite crisis. And for me personally, I would like to explore the new formats, because I think that there is a chance for the arts to survive. I'm very depressive at the moment. Even Medeni wanted to kill me the other day. He told me you can tell anything you want except against a constructa, that was the kind of bottom line. But I don't believe that. I'm really worried actually. I believe that arts will find new formats, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. And I think for my job as well is where we can deliver what's called cultural relations or diplomacy or whatever our approach is to the subject. And then in the strategy 2025, the British Council will move 70% of the program will be delivered online.
So that's about
No, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Still there is ways to explore what's the format. Of course, those are not going to be Teams conferences, which we are all very sick of, not crazy, but I'm pretty much sure perhaps the answer is there, but we are still far from it.
Okay, thank you very much. That's quite a way to end. Yes, from our side, the Austrian side, I already mentioned it before, but it's a climate diplomacy and things like this, and, digital humanism as interface between culture, society, and so on, dealing with AI, dealing with surveillance, dealing with all these things. These are the topics that we're going to move in, and let's see if it works out. Let's see if it's fair. And let's see if it's sustainable or not, but that's the field in the future that we're going to cover. Thank you very much for taking part in this panel. Thank you for watching. If you watched, we tried to do our best in getting the people who spoke actually on the screen, in spite of this distortion that we have here. But thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Actually, it's a great honor to have people spot. And and be able to exchange quite openly, directly. So I think that's it for this panel. Thank you also for the organization, University of Arts, everyone behind it, technicians and so on.
Let's give applause to ourselves. Thank you all so much. We have the audience online. It's not very large, but it will be a recording of the session, so we can go back to it. And now our technical support will stop the live stream, and we can all go to the coffee break. Thank you so much.
Thank you.